Motor vessel, vacate your engine room. We are prepared to subject you to disabling fire. That was the warning, a real voice over open water. A real order sent to the men inside an Iranian cargo ship. Leave now, because the next thing coming at you will not be another radio message, it will be steel. Then the firing started, the rounds hit. The vessel stopped, Marines boarded. American forces took custody. That is where this story begins. Not with Trump's statement after the fact, not with the usual television framing about strength and resolve, not with a generic line about tensions in the Gulf. It begins with a ship being told to clear its engine room because the blockade was about to stop being a threat and become a physical act. And the real story is not that one Iranian ship was hit. The real story is that Washington has now created an enforcement precedent. That is the phrase that matters here. A precedent because a blockade can live for a while in the world of declarations, warnings, patrols, and political theater. Governments can bluff, captains can test, diplomats can keep talking. Everybody can still tell themselves there is a meaningful line between pressure and force. But once a ship is disabled, boarded, and seized, that line starts to collapse. The blockade is no longer just a structure of threat. That changes everything. Before this moment, any ship thinking about testing the line was gambling against a warning. After this moment, every ship is gambling against an example that is much more dangerous, because examples travel faster than statements. They move through shipping firms, intelligence services, military staffs, insurance markets, and foreign ministries all at once. A statement can still be doubted. A ship with a ruined engine room cannot. So if you want to understand why this event matters, you have to stop looking at it as a single tactical success and start looking at it as a category shift. The United States has not simply shown it can stop a vessel. It has shown what stopping a vessel now looks like. That creates a threshold trap for both sides. Iran is trapped first. Tehran now has three broad options, and none of them is good. The first option is to absorb the strike, take the humiliation, and do very little militarily. That is the safest path politically. It is corrosive. A government that has spent weeks telling its population and the wider region that it still has leverage, still has tools, still has ways to raise the cost of pressure, cannot easily watch one of its ships get hit and boarded by the United States without losing something important. If Tehran swallows this too quietly, then every future American warning becomes more credible, and every future Iranian warning becomes less so. The second option is direct retaliation. Strike an American ship, hit an American facility, fire at coalition-linked infrastructure. That would answer humiliation with force. But it would also move the crisis into a much more dangerous phase almost immediately. The moment Iran replies to a boarding with direct military action, this stops looking like hard blockade enforcement and starts looking like an open exchange between states already primed to expect something larger. The third option is indirect retaliation. Use proxies, use the Houthis, use deniable harassment, drones, mines, or pressure against shipping and Gulf infrastructure. This is the most tempting option because it lets Iran answer without answering cleanly, but it is also its own trap. Indirect retaliation widens the map, brings more actors into the risk zone, alarms more governments, and turns a confrontation at one choke point into a broader shipping crisis. It may preserve ambiguity, but it destroys containment. Those are Tehran's roads. And look at Washington. America has its own problem because once it has used disabling fire and a boarding team, it has quietly created a new enforcement floor for itself. If the next Iranian-linked vessel tests the line and the United States suddenly hesitates, credibility falls. But if the next vessel is also hit, then the pattern hardens. And once the pattern hardens, the blockade stops being a political instrument backed by military power and starts becoming a repeatable regime of military force that is much harder to control. This is why the easy triumphalist reading misses the deeper danger. Tactically, yes, the United States won this encounter. It stopped the ship, damaged it, boarded it, and took control. But strategic crises are not judged only by who wins the first hard moment. They are judged by what that moment forces everybody else to become. And this moment forces everybody into worse calculations. Start with perception inside Tehran. Iranian media had already been framing American military movements as something more serious than negotiation pressure. In that view, diplomacy is not diplomacy at all. It is camouflage. Talks are the public face placed over repositioning, airlift, reconnaissance, and preparation for a larger blow. Once an Iranian vessel is actually hit and seized, that interpretation becomes easier to believe inside Iran, not harder. The incident becomes proof material. That matters because proof changes how signals are read. If Iranian commanders now begin to see this event not as an isolated enforcement act, but as the visible beginning of a broader ladder, then every American move that follows becomes heavier. Flights look less like logistics and more like staging. Drone activity looks less like monitoring and more like mapping. Naval movements look less like posture and more like sequence. And once two sides begin reading each other through maximum threat assumptions, the room for controlled signaling shrinks fast. That is why Yemen matters. The Houthis matter here not because they can overturn the overall balance by themselves, but because they are the perfect instrument for widening the crisis without clarifying ownership. If Hormuz becomes the place where blockade enforcement turns kinetic while the Red Sea starts heating up again through proxy pressure, then the shipping story stops being local. It becomes systemic. Escort burdens rise, insurance costs surge, route calculations change, commercial hesitation spreads. One confrontation begins to contaminate the wider maritime system. That is when the headline becomes too small for the event. The headline says an Iranian ship was disabled. The deeper reality is that the crisis has gained another rung on an escalation ladder that already stretches from Hormuz to Yemen to Gulf infrastructure to global trade. And then there is the command atmosphere around all of this. This is where weak commentary usually becomes panic theater. So it is worth being disciplined. The point is not that one strategic aircraft or one strange intercept automatically means the world is on the edge of nuclear war. That is unserious. The point is that once continuity of common assets, unusual messaging, airlift, and live maritime enforcement begin clustering inside the same public timeline, the psychological character of the crisis changes. People stop seeing a contained boarding operation. They start seeing a system under stress, checking itself for the possibility of something larger. That does not prove the larger thing is coming. It proves that the possibility of it has entered the atmosphere. An atmosphere in a crisis is not fluff. It is part of the machinery. Markets move on it. Governments prepare around it. Shipping firms price it. Military staffs interpret through it. Media amplifies it. Public anxiety hardens it. That is why precedents are so dangerous in choke point confrontations. A precedent is not always the biggest event in a crisis. It is the event that changes what all future events mean. Before this, ships could still imagine testing the blockade as a gamble against a warning. Now they know what the answer can look like. Before this, Tehran could still tell itself the blockade was pressure without proof. Now proof exists. Before this, Washington could threaten without fully owning. Now it owns them too. And once that happens, every subsequent move gets heavier. If Iran does almost nothing, Washington will conclude the method worked. If Iran retaliates directly, the crisis accelerates openly. If Iran retaliates indirectly, the map widens and attribution becomes murkier. If more ships test the line, the United States will have to decide whether this was a demonstration or the first example of a repeatable enforcement model. And if more naval incidents, more proxy activity, more flights, and more command assets keep clustering together, then the whole region will begin acting as if what started as a blockade dispute is turning into a wider military phase. That is the trap now, sitting under this story. America cannot easily go soft after proving hardness. Iran cannot easily go quiet after public humiliation. The Gulf cannot stay calm if commercial shipping starts to look like a repeat battle space, and the wider world cannot ignore a choke point crisis once disabling fire. Boarding teams, proxy risk, and strategic command systems all begin appearing in the same timeline. There's also the economic layer, and it matters more than many people want to admit. The Gulf does not need all-out war to shock the world. It only needs enough repeated uncertainty to make transit feel unsafe and delay feel smarter than movement. That is how choke points exert power in the real world, not only by being fully closed, but by becoming too expensive to trust. Once that happens, the damage spreads quickly. Energy markets tighten, insurance rises, importers pay more, governments start contingency planning, shipping firms reroute or pause, and every state that depends on stable maritime trade starts asking the same question: is this still a blockade, or is it becoming a live conflict zone under another name? That distinction is everything. A blockade is a political tool. A live conflict zone is a system shock. What happened to this ship pushes the crisis toward the second category. So the thing to watch now is not the tactical success of the boarding by itself. It is whether the use of force on this vessel becomes the new normal. That is the real decision point hidden inside the drama. Because the real danger is not that the United States disabled one Iranian ship. The real danger is that Washington has now shown every actor in this crisis what enforcement. And once enforcement has a visible precedent, the question is no longer whether tension is rising. The question is how many fronts open when someone decides that precedent cannot be allowed to stand.